Good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. Today we are trying to start a new series on sociology of India. The first lecture on the sociology of India is to understand the emergence and growth of sociology as a discipline in India. So we kind of have an understanding of the difference between sociology of India and sociology in India. So basically sociology of India tries to understand how there was different ways in which India as an object of study was subject to understanding by foreign travelers, by different philosophers, anthropologists, British officials. And in sociology in India, we will look into how the discipline got professionalized and institutionalized with the effort of the Indian sociologists themselves. So to start with, we know that sociology in India is the product of intellectual response of the Indian to Western interpretation of Indian society. And that is kind of, we know that there was a certain ways in which society in India was studied by Western scholars, and we can refer to the Indological approach where the stress was on the book view and reading through religious text, interaction with certain community, understanding of India was developed. Now, in critique to such an understanding, sociology in India as a discipline emerged. So it's both the kind of the Western theorization of India as society, the colonial rule, the nationalist movement, the Renaissance and social reformers that together go in constructing a discipline for India. So if we look into the origin of the discipline in India, it goes back to the days of the British colonial power and realize that knowledge of Indian social life and culture was an essential requirement for the maintenance of its dominance. So there were a number of scholars who were saying that India is kind of primitive or backward because they were comparing society in India with the West, and therefore it was important to understand India on its own and not necessarily rely on certain textual understanding but do empirical studying to understand different dimension, the multiple perspective of which we can understand society in India. So sociology in India tried to answer questions relevant to the discipline by locating itself in the particular context of Indian society. So it was not kind of accepted that we could just compare India with the West and come up with an understanding, because it was not true for every part. It was a kind of a heterogeneous culture with diversity of religion, class, region. So therefore, it was needed to understand social institution, economic, political process with reference to the context in which it was being studied. So rather than having the approach of universalism, it was necessary to have specificity, particularism to the understanding of India. So when we look into the intellectual growth of the discipline in India, we see like other social science discipline, sociology was influenced by the Western philosophical and social scientific tradition, because by the time it comes into India, in the West it had already taken shape. So there were a number of theoretical perspective, theoretical ways in which sociology as a discipline had emerged. So it did influence Indians and other scholars trying to study India. So the intellectual growth, if we look into it, we can identify three trends in which can be seen in terms of understanding the growth of discipline. The first is social anthropological and the second is philosophical. Third is influence of the Western sociology. So the beginning of 20th century, sociologists and anthropologists in Europe were taking a lot of interest in India, and the anthropologists, they wanted to kind of study society in India because it was kind of part of the other. So India became a kind of a field which the Britishers could study and could kind of go on with the understanding that anthropology is the study of the other. So now when anthropology kind of comes into India as a discipline, this bifurcation between anthropology as kind of studying the other and sociology studying the own society becomes questionable. So many of the social institutions and problems of India which call for a sociological investigation can be usefully studied by anthropological method. So it was basically kind of described as a society with caste, tribe, village. These are the subject matter of anthropology in the Western countries, and here was ample evidence of the subject, and therefore it attracted a number of anthropologists to take up study of Indian society. W.H.R. River, he studied the Todas, and he was kind of the first monograph on the tribes. So as a land of tribes and religious group and lot of anthropological subject matter, a number of anthropologists started studying Indian society and publishing monographs in it. The second school which influenced the sociology in India was the philosophical. And now like lot of Indian sociologists were interested in the Western positivism and methodological insight which comes in from the founding figures. But what they do is that they start critically examining the relevance of this philosophical thought to the Indian society. So they were critical of positivism and scienticism. In Lucknow, we had D.P. Mukherjee, who took an interest in the logical and methodological problem. And these sociologists attempted to develop a theory which could kind of be rooted in Indian society, could be rooted in the history and culture of India, and be able to immerse the Indian social thought. So most Indian sociologists were critical of the blind application of theories of Western society for understanding India. The third trend of Indian sociology is the influence of Western sociology, particularly American sociology. So the whole idea that you could apply the comparative method or the evolutionary theory to understand society was critically looked into by the Indian sociologist. So the Western sociology kind of gave us this diffusionist and evolutionary theory, where the idea of evolving from a simple society to a complex society, from a traditional society to a modern society, was kind of considered suitable to explain the nature of social change in India. So the Western sociologist gave us this idea that caste would change into class, the village would change into city life through the process of migration and urbanization, and the whole idea of society becoming more egalitarian, so where the caste would become something which would be of past, and the contemporary society would be a class-based society. Now, a number of Indian sociologists, including Andhra Bette, M.N. Srinivas, D.P. Mukherjee, G.S. Ghurye, they start questioning the Western sociology, and kind of gives us this understanding that it is not necessarily a singular evolution from caste to class. So contemporary India, we know that caste is still significant, only the form in which it has functioned is undergoing change. Similarly, we had the theory of family, and the Western sociologist gave us this theory that the joint family in India would undergo change, and nuclear family would become important. Now, A.M. Shah, an Indian sociologist, gives us the theory that in Gujarat in the 1940s, there was no idea of the joint family. The understanding of jointness itself was subjective, and he gives us the theory that it is not a kind of an evolution from joint to nuclear. What is important to be integrated and understood in the light of industrialization, urbanization, is to understand the changing composition of family. So that is how the Indian sociologists were kind of preparing themselves to critically examine the theory given by Western sociology. And in order to critique, they were not relying only on the book view. So Srinivas tells us that it is important to have a field view, which is based on empirical study. It is based on a research which could be kind of into the field, and then arrive at an understanding. So the sociological method of investigation were kind of retained an important recognized placed within the initial days of the emergence of sociology in India. If we look into the historical development in terms of how the sociology has progressed from, say, the colonial time to the contemporary time, a number of sociologists have kind of classified them into different periods. If we refer to Ramakrishna Mukherjee, he differentiates three stages. The first is the proto-professional stage of sociology, and this was the initial stage. This is prior to the 20th century. The second is the professional stage of descriptive and explanatory sociology in the first half of the present sociology. The third is the currently needed stage of diagnostic sociology. So, if we look into the way in which it is progressing, is to look into the foundational period when the study different dimension of everyday life was documented and an understanding was coming. And then we have the whole idea of a professionalization of sociology, and now we have the whole idea of kind of critically looking into the existing theories, and there are a number of ways in which this has been done. Now, besides R.K. Mukherjee, there are other scholars who have distinguished the development of sociology in terms of three stages. Now, the first was the foundation period, and now this is not much difference, it's just different ways in which the classification has been arrived. So, 1773-1900 AD, this was the foundation of the discipline of sociology. Now, the second stage is the pre-independent year, which is 1901 to 1950, and then we have the post-independent period India, when a large-scale programs, policies were the industrialization, and we start having the scientific method of development that the sociologist demand was there. So, there was a lot of research being done to understand society in India, and also from the perspective of providing inputs to the policy makers. Now, in the 60s, 70s, the Indian sociology given more focus to study the rural culture. Now, because of the way in which post-independent development took place, the emphasis on industrialization, scientific progress, the rural sector was taken back, and there was kind of the deterioration of the rural structure. So, 60s, 70s, a lot of study has been focused to kind of understand the reason why rural India or rural sociology was significant, and therefore you start having the specialization, rural sociology, urban sociology, and industrial sociology. 1980s and 90s, this further specializations kind of increases because of the diagnostic nature of the discipline, and therefore the focus shifts. The people, kind of sociologists and researchers in India, starts kind of focusing on more regional based problems that was being faced, and therefore there was development of sub discipline within the sociology, and some of them could be sociology of science and technology, historical sociology, sociology of gender, sociology of media, and so forth and so on. So, the second phase is the kind of the let's go back to understanding the three stages. The first stage is proto-professional stage, which is the foundational period. So, according to D.P. Mukherjee, the first stage can be considered as proto-professional. Why is it called proto-professional? Because it is laying down the foundation for the emergence of this discipline. And it was a period when there was a lot of data collection, and there was a lot of emphasis on description, explanation, and these were kind of considered as important research tool for understanding society, and also contributing to the knowledge of society in India. So, sociology was submerged in the government reports, surveys, and the life of the people, and this was basically particularly during the British period, where the data was being collected in order to consolidate India as an administrative unit, and therefore a lot of monographs giving into the details of particular tribes was kind of the trend of the period. The two distinct demands dominates this stage of the proto-professional. The first is the requirement of the state policy, that is the administrative requirement to learn about the people. So, the idea was that the colonial rulers or the Britishers could have a a strong hold of the people only if they were aware of its culture, if only when they were aware of the nitty-gritty of the society, and therefore the researches was conducted. And the second was in its the desire in itself to kind of learn about the social polity, and also because a large scale transformation was taking place, so understand how this transformation could be contextualized. The initial development of sociology in India was again linked to the Indian Renaissance. So, reformers like Rajmohan, Vidyasagar, Jyotiba Phule, they were wanted to kind of bring about a change in the social institution, and therefore a large number of cultural practices were questioned, and there was a demand to kind of change this or give up some of the practices. The second stage is pre-independence India, which is called the professional stage. Now, why is it called professional stage? Because during this period, a number of departments in different parts of the country would be set up. Now, prior to the pre-independent period, we did not have a separate department of sociology. It was part of the combined department. For instance, in University of Bombay, it was part along with the economics department. Now, when we look into this period, this period is significant for the institutionalization of the discipline, and it starts with the University of Bombay, which received the fund from the government of India to kind of start teaching of sociology and course in its, and they were kind of separated from the department. Later in 1919, the Department of Sociology and Civics was founded under the leadership of Patrick Gates, who was succeeded as the head of the department in 1925 by G.S. Ghurye. And G.S. Ghurye is kind of considered as a figure for professionalization of India. Why he is considered? Because he took the lead in separating the Department of Sociology and Economics at University of Bombay, and then a number of students who were under G.S. Ghurye later on went on to establishing the Department of Sociology in different parts, like M.N. Srinivas, a student of Ghurye, started the Department of Sociology in the University of Delhi and at Baroda. Iravati Karve started at the Pune. So, there were a number of them who kind of took the discipline to different parts of the country. So, Bombay University is considered as the leading center, especially for the emergence of the discipline. Along with Bombay, the next university is Lucknow University, where we have the kind of nurturing of the discipline by Radhakamal Mukherjee, and he would then be joined by D.N. Majumdar and other sociologists. Besides Lucknow University, we also have the University of Calcutta, which began to teach at the postgraduate student from 1917, and an undergraduate course in sociology, and Mysore University was started in 1917. Now, there were other parts of the country also where it started, where like Pune, Baroda, and it kind of so 1914 to 1920s we see the professionalization of sociology in India. So, in South India, sociology becomes established in 1928 at Mysore University by the effort of B.N. Seal and A.F. Wadia. In the same year, sociology was introduced in Osmania University at the undergraduate level in 1930. Pune had started teaching of sociology and anthropology. So, we look into this pre-independent period. One is the professionalization of the discipline, and the second is in terms of becoming a part of more and more of empirical or field based study. So, it was kind of considered the pre-independent period is kind of just beginning of the professionalization. So, it is kind of a mixed bag without a proper identity. So, only Bombay was kind of getting the funds from government and able to do full-fledged research in sociology. The other centers were still not recognized, and Bombay University was kind of forefront because of the presence of Ghurye, who was using Indological and ethnological method together to understand society. Now, K.M. Kapadia, Iravati Karve, M.N. Srinivas, These are I.P. Desai, M.S. Gore, these are all kind of considered as the founding figures of sociology in India, and they played a contributing role in giving a proper destiny to the discipline. Now, the third stage is sociology in post-independent period. Now, the post-independent period would start off with the idea of the emergence of the discipline and doing a lot of empirical based study. But what is very important is that towards 1960s and 17, the critical diagnostic nature of the discipline kind of took shape. So, Indian sociologists like Radhakamal Mukherjee, G.S. Ghurre, D.P. Mukherjee, they were kind of all pioneers, and in order to understand the contribution by these Indian sociologists, you can refer to the series on Indian sociological tradition, where each of these thinkers and their work has been discussed in detail. So, by the 50s, we see a very good spread of the Department of Sociology and a large scale research being conducted, and according to Srinivas, the post-independent period kind of was suitable for the nurturing of the discipline because of the launching of programs of planned development. So, in the post-independent period, the focus of the research was on the conditioned by the Indian state policy of centralized planning, which needed a lot of information for designing policies and programs. After independence, it kind of there was also the shift towards Indianization on one hand. So, the Western theories, the Western understanding of society, the concepts was kind of subject of critical examination. Indianization and use of regional texts, sources and observation, they kind of weakened the Western impact on Indian sociology. So, the founding fathers, if we kind of know, and which has been repeatedly said in the lecture, is that they kind of combines the methods that was already in place along with the indigenous knowledge of society itself. And if we were looking into some of the contribution, we know the first name is G.S. Ghurre, who combined diffusionist perspective because he was a student of River, and he kind of also look into the Indological orientation. Though he's Indologist, but he would also kind of emphasize on empirical research, and all his students would do it. The other founding figure is obviously Radhakamal Mukherjee, who is a Marxist approach, and he kind of redefines Marxist approach. In itself, Marxist approach is inadequate to understand Indian society. He says it has to kind of been combined with particularistic as well as universalistic criteria for understanding society in India. D.P. Mukherjee advocated Indianized version of Marxist model for the study of Indian tradition. So, if we look into the discipline or as practiced in India today, there are certain challenges being faced. So, according to Sujata Patel, sociology in India has faced two distinct challenges. The first relates to the growth of higher education system and the demand of the regional in states and territories elite to establish local colleges and university. So, the number of university and colleges in the regional areas has increased, which has kind of taken sociology in India to a lot of regional sociology, and that is little problematic. So, the instruction in these are provided in local language, but often they are kind of lack of textbook or even lack of proper teachers to kind of teach these their sociology in regional languages. So, the infrastructure is problematic, and therefore, the quality of the research and the quality of work kind of gets limited, and sociology practice becomes regional. Most of these are kind of limited to the local elite. So, sociology came in these local colleges to acquire the status of a non-professional and commonsensical subject of low prestige. So, this the other problem is also in terms of kind of the emergence of lot of specialization, subfield within sociology, which is kind of taking people away from the larger holistic understanding of sociology in India. So, this to understand the emergence and growth of sociology in India, we can refer to some of the books. The first is M. N. Srinivas, who the title of the article is Sociology in India and its Future, published in Sociological Bulletin, 1994. The second reference is Sujata Patel, Sociology in India, Trajectories and Challenges, article published in Contribution to Indian Sociology in 2011. The third is T. N. Madan, The Sociological Tradition, Method and Perspective in Sociology of India. So, with this readings, we will get a good idea of how the discipline emerged and how it is kind of placed today. So, with this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.